Hello, my name's John McRae and I'm going to be talking about The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. One of the great novels, but at the time when it was published, it wasn't considered one of his best. It was published, as you probably know, in 1925. And we've got to spend some time thinking about what that timing means. Lots and lots of elements come into play here. 1925 is known as the Jazz Age now. At the time, yes, it was a little bit the Jazz Age, but it was also heading towards the time of the Great Depression. It was just after the First World War. And one of the things that it's easy for us to forget is that it was only about 60 years after the American Civil War. America was still very much finding its identity. And 90 plus years have passed since it was published, which is longer in distance than the distance between the novel and the American Civil War. Of course, in the previous decade, the whole world had been through what is now known as the First World War, then known as the Great War because they didn't know there would be a Second World War following on. Now, these elements are all in this novel. But one of the most profoundly important things about most American literature is the burning idea of the great American novel. And this is partly because Americans felt, and in some ways still feel, that because it was a new nation, a new continent, it lacked the depth of culture that, for example, Europe afforded. And Scott Fitzgerald and his wife Zelda and many other writers of the 1920s, sometimes described, I think wrongly, as the lost generation, came to Europe a lot. They found cultural roots, inspiration in Europe having a long classical, literary, cultural, historic tradition. Now, one of the things that perhaps we don't remember so much about The Great Gatsby is that his original title for the novel was Trimalchio in West Egg. Now, that's important. Trimalchio is actually only mentioned at the beginning of chapter 7, and it's a passing reference. But who was this Trimalchio? This goes back to the 1st century AD. This is how far back Scott Fitzgerald is going culturally to find some of the roots that will inspire this novel. And Trimalchio is a figure in Petronius's Satyricon. Stop there. Think of that word, Satyricon. Because one of the things that you might not see about Great Gatsby is there is some kind of satirical intent here. He's questioning the nature of so many things in American society. But there is also somewhere in there an intention to satirize. Now, satire is, of course, as old as the hills. It's something that many, many writers have used to question and examine the society they discuss. Jane Austen famously uses satire and irony to represent something about the age. And very often that satirical intent is something that gives a shape to the whole novel. And I want to suggest that Trimalchio in West Egg is something of a satirical attempt to portray the wealth, the ambition, the aspiration that this novel is about. Because that's quite a difficult question. What is The Great Gatsby about? Yes, it's about a hero, or possibly anti-hero, called J. Gatsby. Why is he called the Great Gatsby? Who calls him the Great Gatsby? Well, again, this is something that the novel is playing with all the time, because we hear time and again, all the way through the novel, different opinions, different views, very often contradictory views about who Gatsby is, about where he got his money, about what he did in the First World War, all these kind of things. And to be called the Great Gatsby, I think there's a nod to a novel by Alain Fournier. Alain Fournier was a French writer who was killed in the First World War, and he only wrote one novel, a very, very great novel, called Le Grand Morne, which translates as The Great Morne, Morne being his name. It's sometimes translated in English as The Lost Domain, and that gives you the idea of a lost paradise, which is very much one of the themes of Great Gatsby. The lost ideal, the lost intangible beauty of the world, the lost love that Daisy represents in the novel. So one of the things that it's about is loss. Yes. But in a contradictory sense, it's also about gain, because it's also about wealth. And here we come to this West Egg, East Egg distinction. The actual place is called Spencer Sands, and there's Great Neck on Long Island. West Egg is where the new money goes, the nouveau riche. It's funny how these things are always in French. Nouveau riche. The old money is in East Egg. The old money is the basis of the class system in America. Now, one of the things that America prides itself on is it is not a class-ridden society the way that British society is. Wrong. Because what makes class in America is money. And if you've had your money for 100 years old or longer than your neighbor, you are old money. Gatsby aspires to being of that aristocratic crowd. He's got lots of money. One of the questions, as we will find when we read the book, is where did he get his money? Is it clean money? And that raises the question, is any money clean money? How did the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers get their money? They were known as the robber barons. And so in 1925, Scott Fitzgerald is writing a novel which is questioning the values of modern American society. Post-war, looking forward to a future where American society is the #1 society in the world. After the First World War, America was an international power. Because if they hadn't intervened in the First World War, Germany might have won that war. So American politics, society, money, and culture, because this was the time when Hollywood was just booming, and a film of Great Gatsby was made almost immediately. In 1926, they made a silent movie of Great Gatsby. This is a turning point moment in American culture. And Scott Fitzgerald wants to bring in a lot of the history, the ambitions, and the aspirations of America. I think in many ways it is a novel, as I said, about loss and love, but also about ambition and about aspiration. I think that is the key word to the whole novel, the aspiration. Trimalchio in ancient Rome, 1st century AD, was the richest man in town. He threw the biggest parties, he threw the biggest events. He staged his own funeral before he died to make it the most splendid funeral in the world. There's something satirical, comic, ironic, weird about that. And actually, Gatsby is weird. And possibly even weirder is our narrator, Nick Carraway. We're going to be interrogating him a lot because he is one of the great unreliable narrators. You can't believe him. He contradicts himself. The novel, we will find, is full of contradictions. And these contradictions go from page 1 to the very end. It is a novel about the contradictions of a society. One or two critics have said, actually, the hero should be Nick Gatsby because they are both aspects of a similar aspirational drive. But one is poor and one is rich. One is successful, one is not. It's a novel about everything in America and America's aspirations. We're going to enjoy looking through it chapter by chapter and finding how these contradictions balance out and make the story that is the emblematic story of 1920s America.